let me tell you about a place. Deep in the frozen wilderness of Russia's Ural Mountains, there's a particular mountain that's different. It's a landmark, yeah, but it's one that people have feared for centuries. And in 1959, it became the stage for one of the most terrifying and completely baffling mysteries you'll ever hear. And it all starts with the mountain's name. See, the local people, the indigenous Mansi, they call it Kholat Syakh. In their language, that means dead mountain. And they have one very simple, very firm rule about it. You don't go there. To them, it has always been a place the living should avoid. But back in January of 1959, a group of 9 Soviet students either didn't know that name or, well, they just didn't care. And these weren't just some weekend campers, okay? They were the best of the best. Young, smart engineers and physicists from a top university, all of them highly experienced hikers and skiers. Their plan was to conquer a nearby peak called Mount Ortorton. It was going to be the ultimate challenge. And if you look at the pictures they took at the start of their trip, you just see happy, confident people, laughing, playing music, totally unaware of what was waiting for them. They never made it to that peak because on the night of February 1st, as the weather started getting really nasty, their leader, a guy named Igor Dyatlov, he made a decision that still makes no sense at all. Instead of heading down into the tree line for shelter, which is what any expert would tell you to do, they decided to set up their tent right there, on a wide open, completely exposed slope of Dead Mountain. And to this day, nobody knows why. We've got their diaries, and the last entries they wrote that night are just completely normal. They were joking around, writing a funny little camp newspaper. There's not a single hint of fear or that anything was wrong. So they went to sleep. But sometime in the middle of that freezing, pitch-black night, something happened. Something so terrifying that it made them throw away every bit of their training, every survival instinct, and just run. And we know they were in a blind panic because they didn't even use the entrance flap. No, they took out their knives and just slashed their way out, right through the side of the tent. It was a desperate, violent escape. Like staying inside for even one more second was unthinkable. They scrambled out into a blizzard without stopping to put on their boots. I mean, can you imagine? Some were just in socks, one person had a single felt liner on. They left 9 pairs of perfectly good hiking boots sitting right there in the tent. And they didn't grab their coats either. They fled into that brutal, howling wind wearing pretty much just their sleeping clothes, leaving behind the one thing that could have saved them from the elements. And the temperature that night? Minus 30 degrees Celsius. That's negative 22 Fahrenheit. And that's before you even think about the wind chill, which would have made it feel unimaginably colder. We're talking lethally cold. So you have to stop and think about that. 9 brilliant, experienced people chose to run from a warm tent into certain death by freezing. It leads you to one absolutely chilling conclusion. Whatever was happening in or near that tent was worse than freezing to death. Of course, the hikers never returned. When they were long overdue, a massive search was launched, and what the rescuers found on the slopes of Dead Mountain didn't solve anything. It just plunged the mystery into a whole new level of strange. The first thing they found was the tent. It was half buried in snow and sliced open, just like we talked about. But inside, it was just eerie. All their stuff was there. Food, maps, their warm clothes, those 9 pairs of boots. Everything was accounted for. The only thing missing was them. The search party followed a set of footprints leading down the slope. They found the first 2 bodies near the edge of the forest, by a small, pathetic fire. They were barefoot and only in their underwear. A few days later, they found 3 more, including the leader, Igor Dyatlov, frozen in positions that made it look like they were desperately trying to crawl back up to the tent. But the last 4 hikers, well, they weren't found until the snow started to melt in May. And this is where the story goes from a tragedy to a full-blown horror show. These last 4 bodies, buried under 13 feet of snow in a ravine, had suffered the most horrific injuries. One had his skull crushed in. 2 others had their ribs shattered with a force so powerful, a doctor compared it to being hit by a car. But here's the part that'll keep you up at night. On the outside, there wasn't a single bruise. No cuts, no scrapes, nothing. The damage was all internal. And then there was Lyudmila Dubanina.
Along with her own devastating chest injuries, the investigators found one last horrifying detail. Her tongue was missing.
So let's just recap the evidence here because it's a lot. We've got these insane internal injuries with absolutely no external cause. We have a panicked escape that makes no logical sense. And to top it all off, when they tested their clothes, some of the items were found to be radioactive. So, faced with all these impossible contradictory clues, what did the Soviet authorities do? Well, they conducted a very short investigation, and then they came up with an official conclusion that honestly explained absolutely nothing. The official cause of death was listed as a compelling natural force. That's it. That was their answer. And with that incredibly vague statement, they closed the case, stamped all the files as top secret, and completely sealed off the area to the public for 3 years. Now, over the years, people have tried to figure this out. The most common theory is an avalanche. Sure, that could explain the crushing injuries, but the search party found no signs of an avalanche, and it doesn't explain the radiation. Then there's the idea of infrasound, a weird low-frequency sound the wind can make that supposedly causes irrational panic. Okay, maybe that explains why they ran, but it certainly can't crush a human skull or remove a tongue. And of course, there's the secret Soviet weapons test theory. That might explain the radiation and why the files were classified. But again, there was no crater, no shrapnel, no evidence of any kind of explosion. Every theory explains one little piece of the puzzle, but not the whole thing. And then there's one last unsettling piece of evidence. The final photograph taken on their camera. It's dark, it's blurry, but it appears to show some kind of strange, glowing orb or light in the night sky. And get this, the local Manzi people later told investigators that on that exact night, they saw strange, glowing spheres flying over Dead Mountain. Which brings us right back to the beginning, doesn't it? Back to the people who've lived in the shadow of that mountain forever. Years later, the case was reopened, and the official conclusion was updated to probably an avalanche. Probably. But the questions are still there. The Mansi named it Dead Mountain. They never climbed it. Maybe they always knew something that those 9 poor souls had to find out for themselves.